The title of tonight's sermon is What About God? And I invite us to hear these words from the Gospel of John, chapter 1, beginning with the first verse. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him. And without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world knew him not. He came to his own home, and his own people received him not. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but born of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth, and we have beheld his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father. Church, this is the Word of God for we the people of God, and we say together, thanks be to God. Well, there was a school teacher who was overseeing the school Christmas play one year. And there were rehearsals and running lines and trying to gather up all the kids and herd them in the right direction. And when it came time for the dress rehearsal, it was pandemonium. The wise men in beards and crowns, shepherds with their staffs, Mary and Joseph with a small baby doll, the sheep made out of construction paper. And one of the young boys was watching all of this unfold. He was looking at all of the commotion, and the teacher saw him looking at the manger scene. And she said to the boy, "What is it? Why are you so taken with the manger scene? Do you have any questions about it?" And with his eyes still glued to the scene, the little boy replied, he says, "There sure is a lot going on here, and it's all pretty exciting. But what I'd like to know is, where does God fit in?" It's a great question from a young mind, right? Where does God fit in? What about God? Do y'all remember when you were children and you waited and waited and waited all year long for Christmas to come around? I saw a cartoon where a little boy was putting on his winter coat and hat one day, and his mother saw him and said, "What are you doing, son?" And the young boy replied to her, he said, "I'm going to go walk down the street. Grandma said that Christmas is just right around the corner, and I'm going to go find it right now." I know how he feels. It takes so long to get here, and we want to rush and go find it. And for me as a kid, it felt like Christmas was never going to get here. And then finally, after all of the waiting, Christmas would finally come, and it was a grand old time. But then there was a problem. As long as it took to get here, it was gone in the blink of an eye. All of that waiting, all of that time, all of the decorating, all of the preparing, it was all over in a flash. Now, is that all that Christmas is supposed to mean? Is Christmas just another day of the year? Is it just another season? Is it just another time to spend our money on things that we don't need, things that we don't want, certainly things that we cannot even afford? Where does God fit in? What about God? We've all got our favorite parts of the Christmas story. Maybe yours is the angels or the manger scene or the shepherds. But tonight, we look at the Christmas story from a bird's eye point of view. In fact, this may be my favorite version of the Christmas story. In the beginning was the Word. Do y'all remember another time in the Bible where you've heard those words, in the beginning? That's right, the very first book of the Bible, Genesis, the very opening words. And that's what John wants us to remember here as he sets up his Jesus story. This is literally a new beginning is happening. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him not one thing was made. In him was life. So not only is the Word God, but all things came into being through the Word. Everything that we know and see, even things we can't see, it all came into being through the Word. It's amazing. Well, Jack, that's all well and good, But what does this have to do with Christmas tonight? Well, that's how John ends the passage in verse 14. He says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. The very Word that John is talking about, the Word that created everything, the Word that is very God himself, the Word became flesh and blood. And his name is Jesus. Now, in the church, we have a fancy word for this called incarnation. And we understand incarnation to mean to put on flesh. Because this is what happens with Jesus. God puts on flesh. God comes to us with skin and bones on. Writer Eugene Peterson phrases it beautifully. He says, the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. I love that. That's what we celebrate here tonight, right? That's what Christmas is all about. Christmas is God moving into the neighborhood. God moves onto our street through Jesus Christ. God moves onto McCormick Avenue. God moves onto Clark Drive. God moves onto Dooley Street. God moves onto Jordan Drive. God moves onto Country Club Drive. God moves onto the Unadilla Highway. God moves onto Crabapple Drive. It's amazing. As I was thinking about this week, if I were God, I would have come riding down on a cloud with thunder and lightning and red skies and shooting stars. There would have been no mistaking that God was now here. I would have had flashing lights and flashing signs all over the place saying, God is here, y'all pay attention. And then I would have come to live in a great big castle. Y'all know like Cinderella's castle when you go to Disney World? That's what I would have been in, but I would have been in King Jack's castle. It would have been luxurious. It would have been great. I would have had one of those crowns, like, those Burger King crowns that you used to get as a kid, except mine would have been real gold, and it would have been wonderful. And I would have strutted all around town. Everybody would bow down to me. Everybody would worship me, and they would know that the king had arrived. But the Christmas story that we all know and love starts out so different from that. It's small. It's quiet. It's a little tiny newborn baby named Jesus. A baby who needs to be fed, taken care of, changed, held, washed, put to sleep. A humble beginning for the Word made flesh. Not really the gift that everyone was expecting. Speaking of that, I heard about a father who was really excited about this particular Christmas one year. He was getting a tree house for his 3 children. He had ordered it offline, and it was supposed to arrive the day before Christmas. And by the way, I hope that all of your gifts made it on time. I think it was kind of tricky this year with all the shipping stuff. Unfortunately for this father, when the package came, the father opened it to find a build-it-yourself sailboat instead. And he immediately called the company in anger to voice his complaint. And the operator really tried to calm him down. He said, please, sir, we sincerely apologize for our mistake. But consider yourself lucky, because somewhere out there on a lake is a man who's trying to sail in your treehouse. Sometimes we don't get what we're looking for, do we? And that's the case with the Word made flesh. Instead of this majestic king coming in all of his glory, we get a little tiny baby. But even though the Word doesn't look like what we thought he was going to look like, who he is and what he came to do, it still remains the same. Jesus is God. And Jesus has come to lead us to life and to turn us into children of God. Now, how many of us really think of ourselves as children of God? We think, well, not me. I've done too much wrong, preacher. I've made a mess of my life. I'm too far gone. I've been away from the church for too long. I've made a mess of things this year. But the promise of John's text tonight is that this Word made flesh This Jesus is on a mission to make all of us into something brand new. Children of God. It may not be how you think of yourself, but it is how God looks at you tonight. With eyes full of love and grace and mercy. Maybe we can start to receive that love tonight. Maybe a transformation can begin. And maybe we will want to share that love with someone else. Heard a story about the Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur, who in December 1903, after many attempts, were finally successful in getting their airplane off the ground. And they were thrilled, as you can imagine. They were ecstatic. And so they went and they sent a telegram to their sister, Catherine. They said, Catherine, we have actually flown 120 feet and we'll be home for Christmas. And Catherine got the telegram. She hurried to the editor of the local newspaper to show him this amazing message of flight accomplished. And she got there. She showed him the message, and he glanced at it, and he said, how nice. The boys are going to be home for Christmas this year. He missed the whole message about the flying part, which was the whole point of the telegram. They tried to share the good news. He just missed it. Well, I hope we don't miss it tonight. Where does God fit in? What about God? Tonight, I invite us to enter into a whole new beginning. I know that this has been a rough year for all of us. How about a new beginning? Does that sound good to you? Sounds good to me. I could use a new beginning. And Jesus brings that. He comes bringing His love, His grace, bringing an invitation for all of us to be a part of God's family. A small church gathered together on Christmas Eve, much like we're doing here. The sanctuary was packed. There was standing room only. And that year, the church decided to have a living nativity in front of the church while the service was going on, including the presence of a real live baby playing baby Jesus in the manger, instead of having a baby doll to do it. Well, guess what happened? Baby Jesus started making a lot of noise, as you can imagine, midway through the nativity scene. He was wailing, he was crying, and he just wouldn't stop. The congregation started murmuring. The kids were trying to help baby Jesus and get him to be quiet, but nothing was working. Finally, the pastor stood up, and off the cuff, he said, folks, now we have a little idea of what Christmas is all about. The incarnation. It's not clean. It's not pretty. It's not little Lord Jesus, no crying He makes. God became human. God put on flesh. God came into the world with all the messiness that comes with it. And He did it all to save us. Wow. Hawkinsville first, where does God fit in? God fits right here. In the middle of your mess. In the middle of your tears. In the middle of your brokenness. In the middle of our suffering, our hurting, and our pain. We are not alone. You are not alone. God enters our world tonight. Full of grace and truth, full of light and life, full of mercy and love for people just like us. Imperfect as we are, sinners as we are, God moves into the neighborhood. God moves onto our street so that we may be changed. Transformed, saved. What good news. Merry Christmas. Thanks be to God.